Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and I just watched episode 7 of Star Trek Lower Decks, and I loved it. I thought it was great. It had a lot of things which I found funny, and a lot of clever things, and it even did what I suggested in the end of my previous review. I said one of the things missing from this show is actually new science fiction ideas and new things, and not just recycling the same exact things we saw a million times before, which can also be fun, making a parody of something which we all loved. And yet I would appreciate it so much more if they actually added something, if they invented their own science fiction idea. And so in this episode we did have a lot of references, a lot of parodies of older stuff, but also some new ideas in addition to it, and so that's exactly what I said they should do. So this episode finally did that, and they showed some new science fiction ideas and also a lot of clever references to do a parody of all the stuff we saw previously, and so I really liked it. And the part with the dog creature, which is able to change its shape and to morph into all kinds of monsters, that was obviously a reference to the movie The Thing, which I always liked, and so it was fun seeing that. My only issue with that is since when is Starfleet allowing to do biological experiments and to create sentient life forms and to play around with them and to turn them into monsters and all of that? It doesn't seem to be something that Starfleet would approve of. But I could forgive that because still it's a parody comedy show, so I'm not taking it too seriously. But some things they showed us in the rest of the episode actually could fit the proper Star Trek continuity and it would make sense. Such as that accident with the transporter which turned the Ensign Purple Hair into kind of an out-of-phase ghost person. And that actually fits a lot of things we saw in the older Star Trek shows. For example, in Star Trek Enterprise in Season 4 there was a whole episode about the guy who invented the transporter, and he was looking for his son who had some kind of accident in the past and he turned into kind of a ghost which is out of phase, and tried to get him back. And so it reminds me of that. And also there was an episode in TNG when Geordi LaForge and Ensign Rowlaren got face cloaked when they were transporting, even though it was said to be because of a Romulan experiment with the face cloak, so it wasn't just because of the transporter itself, but it happened when they were transporting, so maybe it is tied to the transporter. And the whole issue of how the transporter works is something I'm going to make a whole long video about. Basically they said that because of that modification that Cyborg guy did, that it somehow kept him a little bit out of phase, and that's why you can see through him and all of that. So I actually like that whole element, and again, this is a new science fiction idea done in a new way that was not shown before, even though it is similar to a few episodes, especially that Enterprise episode with the guy who turned into kind of a ghost because of the transporter. And this also, they brought up all that issue of, the freaks of all the accidents in Starfleet, and I found that part really funny, probably my favorite part of the episode, when they showed all the different mutations that caused by various accidents in Starfleet. I found that hilarious, and many of them were direct references to all kinds of episodes in Star Trek. The funniest one is probably the one from Voyager, when they showed that creature that looks like what Tom Paris and Janeway turned into after they did a Warp 10 jump, and then they turned into those creatures, and they even had babies, and so they showed the exact same creature here, and say that they assumed that used to be a guy and all of that. So that was probably the funniest part. And also one of the guys is half a baby and half an old man, and that's something that happened to Daniels in Enterprise because of the whole temporal Cold War. At some point he turned into kind of a messed up mutation in which parts of his body were old and parts of his body were young because of all the time traveling mess, and so that reminds me of that. And we also see two officers who got fused together somehow, and that reminds me of an episode in TNG in which people were falling through the floor because parts of the ship came out of phase, and so people were getting stuck inside the floor and stuff like that. So presumably that can happen with people as well, and they can get stuck together. And so I thought all of those freaks they showed us, a lot of them are similar to stuff we actually saw in the other Star Trek shows, and also a few new ones. A few of them were things we never saw before, so that was neat. And also there were a few of them which were like Captain Pike, people who suffered delta radiation poisoning and then they became invalids. And especially in the end when they showed that there are many of them and they're all in those chairs, and they go to the beach, and the woman one wears kind of a bikini on top of that chair, so that was hilarious. So a lot of funny references like that, and also all kinds of new things as well, and so that's why I did like it. And also I liked the twist that they were setting it up as if it's all going to be dystopian, meaning they're taking them somewhere that they'll do experiments on them to some kind of secret lab and all of that, and they're setting it up in such a way that it's all creepy and dark. But then in the end, they actually do go to a lovely place and all of that. And so I love it. I loved it. And they did that kind of joke a lot of times in the show, when they seem to be setting up things in a dark way, but then the twist is that actually it is going to be good in the end. So that is far more in the spirit of the older Star Trek shows, which were always optimistic and uplifting and all of that. And yet, you know, in the newer Star Trek shows, everything was much darker, more dystopian. That was one of my complaints against the Star Trek Discovery and Picard, that very often they went way too dark and destroying the optimistic vision of Star Trek and all of that. And in this show, they often do kind of a setup which is similar to that, but then in the end, no, it's all good in the end. So I love that. I love the fact that it kind of keeps the spirit of the older Star Trek shows, while at the same time still toying with the dark elements, which are also fun. I'm not saying I can never see anything dark and twisted and scary and all of that. I like that as well. But the ending should be optimistic. And so that's how they always do it on the show, and I like it. And that alien guy who are taking them all on this transport ship to that planet. At first I thought, is that species 8472, because he had 3 legs and all of that. So I thought for a moment, wait, did they join the Federation so quickly? It doesn't make sense. But his head doesn't look like species 8472, so he's something else. But that also reminds me of that. And at first they set him up to appear evil, and so it's as if they're taking them to some scary place to be experimented on. But in the end, they're actually in some lovely place in which they can recover and all of that. So I like that. And also, if not for that, I would have complained, is that really how Starfleet is treating people who became so-called freaks and all of that? Is that really in the spirit of Star Trek to treat those people in a bad way? Like, it makes no sense. And so I was happy that in the end, actually, no, they do take care of them well. They do treat them and they do make them feel comfortable even if they cannot be treated. And so in the end, that is the enlightened, optimistic approach, treating people equally even if they're strange and freaks and all of that. So I did like it that in the end it turned out, because for a while in this episode I was scared that, you know, they're going into that direction which is not educational. You know, I always praise the older Star Trek shows for being so educational for kids watching, and that's also something I'll do a whole video about soon, because I want to talk about it, how it influenced my views on things and all of that. And so I think Star Trek always had very strong anti-racism messages, and also showing that you should still respect people who are different, and even if someone is a freak or a mutant, he should still have equal rights and all of that. So somewhere in the middle of this episode, I was kind of thinking, are they really going into showing that these are freaks and that Starfleet just hides them away somewhere or sends them to be experimented on? It's like the completely opposite vision. But in the end, turns out that they are actually treated nicely. So that was a nice surprise. Even though you can still argue in some of the dialogue that people don't want to be freaks and all of that, some of that is still maybe not so nice, but it's still kind of realistic. It's still within the realms of what would be the case. Even if the show was set officially in the continuity, if it wasn't a cartoon, I would still be okay with some of the stuff they showed us. Even Boimler's accident, when he turned into kind of a ghostly figure, that fits the kind of stuff we saw in other episodes, as I mentioned. And so I wouldn't actually have a problem with this, even if it was set in a live action show in the Star Trek universe, because it actually fits something. It fits my theory I had regarding the transporter, which I'll do a whole video on, and that's why I kind of like that whole idea. So that part of the episode I absolutely loved. And there was another part which was about Michael Tilly being put as first officer to a new captain, because she has a babysitter captain who at first she was afraid it will be a Jellicoe type, which was another funny reference. You know, that episode of TNG, Chain of Command, when they replaced Picard with another captain who was much tougher on the crew, and so they referenced him in this episode. But it turns out the new captain is her friend from the academy, and she puts her as first officer, and suddenly Michael Tilly becomes incompetent. She cannot do anything. And so I was thinking, wait a minute, in previous episodes they showed that she's the best at everything, and suddenly she cannot do anything. So what's going on? Seems to be like internal continuity mistake. But then in the end of the episode, it turns out she was faking all of those accidents because she didn't want to get permanently promoted. She wants to be an ensign for some reason, which I don't think they ever properly explained. Why exactly does she want to be lower decks? Does she not want responsibility or what? Like, they never truly explained that. Maybe they will later, maybe they'll reveal maybe someone died under her command or something like that, and maybe that's why she just doesn't want that responsibility. So she pretends to be kind of a bumbling idiot, and she messes things up, and in the end it turns out that it was deliberate, because she didn't want that captain to take her with her on another ship to be promoted and all of that. So she was pretending to be incompetent in the episode, but you know, I didn't find any of that annoying. I did find some moments funny, so I didn't really have a problem with that. So I didn't really hate anything in this episode, and I absolutely loved all the parts with the freaks and all of that. That was really funny, and the funniest part was that reference to Star Trek Voyager's episode Threshold, which is one of the worst episodes ever. It's just so stupid. The way that they explained how evolution works in Warp 10 and all of that was just so stupid in so many ways, especially in Voyager. I know they cannot get home quick enough, but they just happen to invent Warp 10 travel, but then they forget all about it later, and so none of that really made any sense, that whole episode, and yet they referenced it, and I think these jokes would work even for people who don't know the older shows, because that would still be funny. That still is just a funny image on itself, even without you knowing that. But if you do know the references, if you do know what they're poking fun of, then that's even funnier. So this is why I think this show is a good parody of Star Trek, and I do like it. And it seems it's getting better. It's as if someone listened to my criticism and started improving the show based on my recommendations from previous reviews. And you can go back to my previous videos and check. You will see that I said I want them to add more science fiction ideas, and I want Michael Tilly to be less annoying and all of that. And so that did happen. And so that removes a lot of the complaints I had regarding the show. And also they showed like a new space creature which feeds on energy, and it consumes another starship, and then it turns into kind of a jellyfish looking creature in space. And that reminded me of the creatures we saw in Star Trek TNG first episode, Encounter at Farpoint. We saw that kind of space creature which can also turn into different objects and all of that, so I guess it was a reference to that, but it was done in kind of in a new way which we didn't see before. And so I do like to see actual science fiction ideas, and they did deliver some of them in this episode, and that's why I think it might even be my favorite episode yet. And it's obvious that this show is written by real fans who do know the older Star Trek shows, otherwise they wouldn't be able to make so many good references and to poke fun at so many things from the older shows. And so this is obviously made by real fans, and that's why it's so much better. So that's all I had to say about it for today. So I did enjoy it. I do recommend this episode. Let me know what you think, and we can discuss it in the comment section below. And I will see you all next time. Bye bye.